there's endless debate about should you eat this or should you eat this or how many times a day you should eat. And so that's all with the diet. That's all the foods and so on, but it doesn't address the emotional or the social side of things. You have to take from other areas of science, not necessarily nutrition science. And one of the big pieces, I think, is mindfulness.
Welcome back to another episode of the Fasting Method podcast. This is Coach Terri Lance, and I'm here with Jason Fung. Jason, how are you today?
Good. How are you, Terri? Good to be here.
I'm good. It's spring. Spring is starting at least, so things are good. Well, Jason, I know last month we talked about hedonic hunger and conditioned hunger. So we've gone through the three types of hunger now to help people understand. And basically, the hedonic and conditioned hunger, understanding that helps us understand why we eat even when we're not physically hungry. The challenge is that even knowing all of that, sometimes it's hard for people to really relate to why then is it still so hard for me to implement this? I've got this knowledge. I understand what those pieces of hunger are, and I understand that I'm not hungry, but why am I struggling with those old patterns that I've developed over time? So I wondered if we could talk more about that today. What makes managing hunger challenging for us?
Well, I think it's because we don't use the right tools for the most part, because most of the time we think that we want to manage hunger, it's through the diet. But that's not really the case unless you're talking about homeostatic hunger. It doesn't really work for hedonic hunger or conditioned hunger because they're totally separate issues. So there's endless debate about should you eat this or should you eat this or how many times a day you should eat. And so that's all with the diet. That's all the foods and so on, but it doesn't address the emotional or the social side of things. You have to sort of take from other areas of science, not necessarily nutrition science. And one of the big pieces, I think, is mindfulness. Mindfulness is this concept that you should try to be aware of what you're doing, not that you'll necessarily not do it, but at least be aware of what you're doing and why you're doing it. So having this understanding of hunger is very important because you can now say to yourself, okay, let's be a little bit mindful. So am I eating because I really am physically hungry? That's dominated by hormones and stuff, right? GLP-1, ghrelin, all this sort of stuff. Or am I eating because it's hedonic hunger? Am I bored? Am I emotional? Am I depressed? Or is it because of conditioned hunger? That is, I see the donut at the coffee shop and that's why I want to eat it. So as long as you're aware of it, that's the first step. And you'll know this, of course, but mindfulness is actually incredibly powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And there's been a number of studies. There's two things that are striking. One is that it's quite effective for the first part. But the second part is that it tends to get better over time. That is, as opposed to dietary strategies that weaken over time. So anytime you start a new diet, you lose a lot of weight, and it really can be any diet. And then it sort of bounces back. And that's the typical pattern for almost everything. And in studies of mindfulness and mindful eating in particular, the effect actually tends to get stronger because it gets easier, basically. So the idea is that even if you know that you're eating for an emotional reason, at least you know it, you acknowledge it, and then you may or may not do it. So it doesn't mean that you won't eat that donut. It just means that you know that, hey, I'm not actually hungry. I'm going to eat it anyway because I want to, and I'm feeling a little down, and I'm going to have that. And what that does, of course, is it solidifies in your mind what you're doing and why you're doing it, so that in the case that it's a little bit on the edge, on the verge, where you don't really have to take that donut, then you'll at least be like, you know what? I'm not actually hungry. This is hedonic hunger or conditioned hunger, right? I'm at the coffee shop and so on. So therefore, I'm going to choose not to do it because I'm not actually that. I didn't really want it. So you're basically shifting those sort of borderline cases to making the right choice for the right reason. And that's going to be very powerful over time because what's going to happen is that you're going to be able to understand your behavior. And if there are cases where you always fall into a trap, like conditioned hunger. Like every time I go to the get a coffee, I get a donut sort of thing, right? And once you identify the problem, you're mindful about the problem, you've done it anyway because you don't have to not do it, right? That's not the point of mindfulness. The point of mindfulness is not to change your behavior, but be aware of your behavior. So once you're aware of your behavior, now you can say, okay, what am I going to do to get around that? Maybe I'll make my own coffee. Maybe I'll use the app. This is actually what I do. I use the app instead of going to the coffee store. It does two things. One is that it saves me a lot of time. But two, it avoids me having to make that decision when I get there to not buy a muffin or a donut or whatever, right? So over time, it just becomes a habit, and then you just get used to using your app or whatever, and then that's it. Or you can figure out other ways to sort of deviate. But the first step is knowledge. So you have to understand the hunger, which is why understanding this book is actually quite important because everybody has, not everybody, but a lot of people have the wrong idea. Like we talk about these issues a lot, but a lot of people have the wrong idea that if I just eat the right diet, I'm going to lose weight. That's only a piece of it. That's the sort of what I always think. It's like, it's actually a really complex topic. And because nutrition science, and it's not people's fault, right? Nutrition science has dumbed this whole thing down, not only just to the diet, but to calories. A single aspect of this entire diet, of which the calories is such a small part of the homeostatic hunger, which is not even part of the whole eating behavior. So it's not their fault. It's really the fault, I think, of the nutritional scientists and the authorities who are kept saying it's calories, calories, calories. These calorie bullies, right? They're all like, a calorie is a calorie, a calorie is a calorie. It's all willpower. It's like life doesn't work that way. But anyway, so mindfulness is probably the first place to start. I mean, there's other topics we'll probably get into, but that's what I think is probably the most important thing. And that's why you have to know about it, and then you have to consciously make that decision every time. And it's almost with everything you eat, even during a meal, like, am I eating this because of hunger? If it is, what kind of hunger is it? Do I really need it? If yes, the answer is yes, I really will feel bad if I don't get it, then have it, right? But the
Mhm.
next time you may feel different. And that's where the wins start to stack up. And that's why, again, unlike most other dietary strategies, it tends to get easier because it tends to become more automatic. At first, it's very, very artificial. Everything I eat is like, do I really want this? Why am I eating this? Right? And then when you eat it, you say, again, mindfulness is about, okay, so now I'm eating this donut, which I know I shouldn't have, but I wanted to. I'll savor it, enjoy it, right? If you're going to enjoy it, enjoy it. Don't feel guilty about it, but know that that's why you did it and you made that decision to do it.
I think also the mindfulness, for example, during a meal is so important. I've talked with so many clients recently who talk about, I get to the end of my meal and I just want something sweet.
Yeah.
So that's conditioned hunger, that's habit, that's habitual response. But if I'm more mindful as I'm eating, I sense that I'm satisfied. I sense that I've enjoyed my meal. But if I'm distracted and doing other things, more food just makes sense. It just to continue eating and to move toward that sweet thing. Versus if I'm eating more mindfully, I can really recognize I'm satisfied. I've had a complete meal. I don't need to just keep pursuing more things that are just habit.
Yeah.
So I think that mindfulness is really important, as you said, as I'm making the decision and then also as I'm eating.
Exactly. And then the key is that if you do want something sweet and you recognize that that's simply conditioned hunger and hedonic hunger, right? Then you say, okay, fine, I will have a little bit. I won't have the whole cake or whatever. I do want that sweetness, but I'm going to get enough by having half the piece because you're mindful now. Or you say, okay, I'm going to have fruit because fruits is also sweet. It's not the greatest diet food in the world, but it's not that bad. It's not as bad as ultra processed cake and stuff. It's got a lot less sugar. So you might make that decision again. As you're eating it, it's like, okay, now you can actually make the changes. Not that you will necessarily not have it, but you can then make. So the wins are in avoiding the foods you know you shouldn't eat anyway. Who doesn't know you shouldn't eat cookies and cake? That's pretty obvious to any diet you follow, truthfully. But now it's the mindfulness that really gets you to the point where you can either cut it out, but even reducing it is that win. So, yeah, it's like during a meal, in between meals, and all that. And then it becomes second nature. And that's where it's great to have groups like we do at the fasting method, where you can talk about it and be reminded to do it, right? And that's the key is like if you're doing everything yourself, sometimes you just forget to do stuff, right? And then eventually somebody talks about it and say, "Oh yeah, yeah, that's actually what I should be doing because, now I remember," sort of thing.
So, Jason, obviously the mindfulness being key here, what other things do you think help guide us in changing some of our old routines and creating things that support us better?
Yeah, and then the second thing that takes from the mindfulness is really the mindset. And this again is one of the most crucially important things because again, if you think it's all about the diet, you're probably not going to succeed. And really the proof is in the pudding. There's tons and tons of diet books out there. Usually eat this, not this, or fat is bad, or this is bad, that is bad, this is good, right? And those things never really last very long. It's about being mindful, understanding. You start with the knowledge, mindfulness, and then you have to start by changing your mindset because the mindset really colors everything you look at. And you see this in every aspect of life, truthfully. Like you see people who are very optimistic. So everything, yeah, it's fine. We'll get through it. Like something bad happens and some people just fall apart. And some people are like, yeah, well, that's life. So everybody, even though if the same thing happens to somebody, and we all know people on both ends of the spectrum. Even though it's the same event, the responses are very, very different. And of course, you see the people with the really negative mindsets often do very badly, and the people with the very positive mindsets do very well. In fact, there's a study I just saw about this, talking about people who are optimistic. They do way better, obviously. And it's not because they are smarter or stronger or whatever, it's because of their mindset. And the thing is that it's the same in weight loss. The way you look at something colors how you see things, which then affects your judgment, which then affects what you think about it, which affects what you do next about it, right? Because if you see something as completely hopeless, oh, well, then you're just going to give up, right? The example I use in the hunger code is if you gain a little bit of weight, there's two ways to look at it. One is this very negative mindset. Oh, no, that's it. I'm done. This diet's finished. Boom. When you have that mindset, you are done. You're going to quit because you think it's hopeless, which then means you are going to quit. As opposed to this growth mindset, which is that, hey, this is just a normal part of the weight loss journey. Everybody goes through it. This is my time. I'm going to get through it, right? Again, it's the same event, but looking at it differently, people with a negative mindset will be like, oh no, that's it. I'm finished. I'm going to quit. Versus, oh, this is part of regular. I need to buckle down and go forward. It's true for everything. Same thing with something like fasting, because we talk a lot about fasting. If you see it as a punishment, you're finished because you'll never do it. If you see it as an opportunity to lose weight, improve yourself, feel better, in addition to some of these other very positive things, inflammation and so on, you're going to be like, okay, this is hard, but hey, this is going to be worth it. And so mindset is people think that it's very set in stone, but it's actually not. You can actually convince yourself of all kinds of things, and people do. But you do have to sort of make a conscious effort to repeat it to yourself and say it to yourself and feel it. So, again, in the book, I may give the example of sugar. So, if you see sugar as something sweet and desirable, which it is, it's people like sweet things, then you're going to want it. So if you don't get it, you're going to have a deprivation mindset. You're going to have a mindset that I want it, I can't have it, life sucks. You'll never stick to it because the minute you get access to it again, you're going to do it. And this is the whole thing with a lot of bariatric surgery, for example, where they cut somebody's stomach or rewired them. They couldn't eat, but they didn't change their mindset, right? So they're losing weight, but they couldn't eat because they're surgically altered, right? They cut out the stomach and so on, but they still wanted to. So all that got them was a deprivation mindset, which means that the minute that they could get around it, and they did, they ate constantly, they drank milkshakes and all this sort of stuff. So even though they got the bariatric surgery, they didn't change their mindset. So they actually failed because a lot of them regained all that weight. So bariatric surgery has been much less successful than we would have expected. Much less. Like it just basically barely even works long term. And people are like, well, the surgery is fine. Yes, the surgery is fine, but weight was regained. That's sort of like, surgery was a success, but the patient died, right? It's like that's not a success. So the whole thing is that if you take that deprivation mindset, then you're sort of done. You're not going to succeed. If you change your mindset and you do this by sort of repeating to yourself that, hey, sugar is toxic, sugar's not good for me, I don't want it. Now it's totally different because you might have access to it, but your mindset has now colored it so that you see sugar as a negative, not a positive. So you're not having a deprivation mindset. You're like, oh, okay, well, I don't really want it. Maybe a little bit, but sugar is a poison. The dose makes the poison. So therefore, I need to minimize the amount of sugar. And then you simply don't want as much. That worked for fat. For years, we vilified fat and people saw it. So even though prior to this whole dietary guidelines of 1970s, people ate fat, right? It was just a regular thing. You ate your pork chop and whatever. And then because of the media and all this sort of stuff, it became sort of this really bad thing. And people changed their mindsets, right? But it's really just a repetitive thing, just like they change their mindset about drinking and driving, for example. So, 40 years ago when I was growing up, people were like, yeah, I was so drunk and then I got behind the wheel. Ha ha ha. Nobody thinks that's funny anymore
That's right.
because of the education. It was the mindset that changed through things like Mothers Against Drunk Driving. So I remember seeing these ads when I was little, right? But it was quite striking because now I think back about those days and it was quite common. People were like laughing about how drunk they were when they got in the car. And it was like, yeah, you could have killed somebody. You could have killed yourself or you could have killed somebody else. That is not funny at all. But they thought it was funny. And at the time, people thought it was funny. Or if you ever watch like old 1980s comedies, some of them just didn't age very well, right? It was right, quite awkward and everything. But again, it's that whole mindset, right?
Hmm.
You can do the same thing with ultra processed foods. So now the big thing is about ultra processed foods. We see this big push in the United States about eating real food, which is fantastic. So this mirrors that whole low fat thing, except I think we're much more correct to push real food versus low fat foods. So the whole point is that through the repetition of getting it in the dietary guidelines, for example, and this is why I think is actually the new dietary guidelines are so much better than I expected. I actually thought it would be just an incremental improvement, but I think it's a huge step up. This whole thing about getting rid of ultra processed foods, eating real foods. I mean, that's my number one rule in the hunger code. So again, changing your mindset, that is looking at a food and seeing all the chemicals. And I do this now because of all the new data on ultra processed foods. I look at a food, I look at, wow, there's a lot of chemical in here, and I'm actually slightly repulsed. So I will put it down. But again, it's not a deprivation mindset, right? I'm not
Hmm.
saying, oh, look at this packaged whatever. I really want it, but I shouldn't have it. That's not it. I don't want this. Like, this is really terrible stuff. Give me the real food. So again, it all starts with the mindset. Behavior change is actually what we're after here, not necessarily dietary change, but behavior change. So behavior change is going to encompass these two very important aspects, I think, of mindfulness and mindset. And that's where I really think we need to move towards. And this is why groups like the fasting method are actually quite it's so much more than just here, eat this, don't eat this, and do this or fast this much. Yes, you could read a book and say fast this much, but you're not going to change your mindset because you're not going to have the discussions. You're not going to talk about mindfulness, right? So you're missing it more than you think you're missing.
Hmm.
That's why we see such success when people work with the coaches. Honestly, sometimes I'm just flabbergasted by how well some people are doing with the coaching. And it's because when you actually work with somebody on it, you're going to get discussions about that. So then for it's going to bring it to the top of your mind, which means you're going to start thinking about the mindfulness and the mindsets, as opposed to just reading about it. And then, yes, you may do the same thing, but you're not going to have the right mindset. You're not going to have the mindfulness. And it's no different, honestly, than people who get a business coach, a CEO coach, a life coach, a personal trainer. To me, it's sort of a no-brainer. If you want to lose weight, why wouldn't you get a coach? If you want to train for a marathon, you might get a coach. If you want to play basketball, you get a coach for your kids' teams and stuff. Why wouldn't you do the same for this super important part of your life, your health and your life, right? So while people are happy to spend money on personal trainers, because there's a whole, there's lots of personal trainers. There's a whole lot of people who make their living doing this. Why? Because it's helpful. Not because you can't find what exercise to do on the internet. I can find a professional program in like 30 seconds. If I ask ChatGPT, they'll come up with a great program for me, but it won't change the mindfulness. It won't change my mindset, and I probably won't follow it. That's the reality.
Yeah.
That's why that whole profession exists, and I think it's great. So I think it's the same thing. It's really getting to these other aspects that need to
Yeah.
happen.
I think you're also really highlighting the mindset around diet. Many of us have done 103
Yeah.
diets, and diet mentality doesn't work. We know that. But changing our mindset to this is a lifelong journey. I'm creating a lifestyle that will support my goals long term, not I'm going to do it for a few months, reach my goal, and then go back to all my old habits. That we actually have to transform. We have to think differently. We have to engage. We have to pay attention differently. And I think that's one of the reasons why the understanding hunger is so important is even with a coach, even with a community, if I listen to it just as what are the rules and I'll follow the rules, we're going to fall off. That's not going to be long term. It doesn't change our identity. But like you said, having discussions with your coach, having discussions within the community that help us change how we think about these things long term. That's what's going to get us to goal and keep us there long term. Whereas old diet mentality failed us because we were willing to buckle down and do something hard, but we had a belief that I only have to do this for a short period of time.
Yeah, and I think that's the key, right? I mean, they talk about identity. It's like the difference between somebody who just runs and somebody who is a runner.
Mm-hmm.
It's important because it forms part of your core identity. It's really in their mindset that this is what they do, this is part of who they are, right? I'm a tennis player, I'm a golfer, it's not like, oh, I'm going to play. That mindset is one of like, I don't really want to do it, but I should, so here, I'm going to do it. As soon as you have the opportunity to not do it, it's done, right? So
Mm-hmm.
getting to that point is actually quite a involved journey. And really one of the things that sort of gets missed a lot in these diet books. And that's why the diet book industry, honestly, it's an everlasting sort of thing, right? It's like the next one and the next one and the next one. What I try to write is not a diet book, because if you look at what I talk about in the obesity code, the hunger code, which is sort of a sequel to the obesity code, it's not about here, follow this diet. This is why fat is bad. This is why sugar is bad. This is why this is bad. It's really about, hey, this is an understanding of the obesity code, sort of the hormones that are involved. The hunger code is about this is the underlying hunger, which discusses the hormones, but I don't redo it. Because some people say, how's this different? It's like, there's nothing exactly the same about it, right? I actually think it's funny because you're like, what am I going to learn that's new? It's like, the whole book, like the whole hedonic hunger, conditioned hunger, and most of the hormones, because they're relatively minor compared to insulin and cortisol. So the obesity code was sort of getting away from calories, getting to insulin cortisol, and then this takes into account the rest of the hormones for homeostatic hunger, plus the difference between eating a low insulin diet and a low carbohydrate diet, because they're not exactly the same thing. And then sort of adding that two-thirds of it, which is the hedonic hunger and conditioned hunger, and then trying to put it all together in a very practical package. But it's all relatively new material in the time that we've been doing TFM and all that sort of stuff because of the importance that are highlighted in discussion with people about why these other things are important. But again, it draws from other aspects. So behavioral psychology, addiction medicine for food addictions, because that's another area that's had a lot. And then a lot around the neuroscience of the food matrix and why processing sort of disrupts the food matrix and how it actually is so bad. So yeah, I agree. Those are the key aspects. And that's what we're going to hopefully be able to help people with about these topics. Because, like anything else, it's like in psychology, you have this vision of, lying on the couch and talking to a therapist sort of thing. But talking is a big part of psychology and all this sort of mindfulness and so on, because that's how it works, right? You have to talk, you have to understand, you have to express yourself, you have to understand.
Mhm.
Not simply here, read this book, listen to this podcast, fast for this long, eat this and not this, do this and not that,
Right.
exercise and that, right? Yeah, I could probably summarize that for you in like 30 seconds or less. It's not that difficult, but it won't help.
But as you've highlighted in the book, so much of understanding what to do, if we're only thinking about it in our own mind, we're going to keep using the same problematic ways of thinking about it. We've got to be engaging with other people.
Yeah.
We've got to hear ourselves say it. A lot of food addiction is happening in silence, in our own mind, and getting to flesh it out a little bit with other people and have modeling from other people really helps us start to see our own capabilities differently.
Especially like if you think about addiction, if you look at the most successful group for alcohol, which is Alcoholics Anonymous, it's groups, right? It's the social modeling you get from all that sort of stuff, like acceptance. They talk about forgiving yourself and acceptance and making amends. And the classic sort of line you see in every movie is like, hi, I'm so and so, I'm an alcoholic. Again, that's mindfulness, right? That's like,
Mhm.
let's acknowledge the problem. Let's acknowledge that we are fallible. And let's start from there. And then seeing what other people do, right? You have a sponsor, so you have somebody who's close who's going to support you, but you also listen to the other people's stories.
Mhm.
And that's the sort of thing that often is missing from this sort of weight loss, which is you have a doctor and a patient. Here, take this drug. And it's like, okay, well, there's no therapeutic relationship here, right? Or a doctor and a dietitian. Eat this, but not that. Okay, bye. Come back in 3 months. No Alcoholics Anonymous, no addiction program works like that. It simply doesn't work. So if you have food addiction, which is now a more well understood and more researched scientific entity, then you have to take a page out of addiction medicine and say, okay, well, let's look at these other things that have helped addictive behaviors
Mhm.
and find it, because ultra processed foods can be addictive. You get these ridiculous people saying things like, oh, but you have to eat food. I'm like, I'm not saying you don't have to eat food. Don't eat ultra processed food. Don't eat the foods that you are addicted to. If you're addicted to alcohol, it doesn't mean you can't drink tea.
Right.
Why would I say that, right? So if you're addicted to ultra processed carbohydrates, why couldn't you eat an egg? Surely you can eat an egg. Like that doesn't even make any sense, right? It's from people who don't understand the problem as it's presented. So that's why I say, getting to this wider discussion is actually so, so important, because so much of diet culture is driven by this sort of reductionist idea. Let's reduce everything to a calorie. It doesn't matter if it's a cookie. 100 calories of cookies is the same as 100 calories of broccoli. No, they're not. They're completely different in almost every way. They have completely different homeostatic, hedonic, and conditioned hunger variables.
That's right.
One is going to lead to a lot of hunger and one is not. That's just the way it is. But this idea that we can reduce everything to this ultra simplistic and not useful concept of the calorie is, I think, what drives a lot of the poor eating behavior. I was talking to a friend of mine, and he was saying that he thinks the whole calorie culture and these calorie bullies is what makes people gain weight, because they're all focused on exactly the wrong thing. Nobody's focused on mindfulness. They're all focused on counting calories. Nobody's focused on mindset. Nobody's focused on proper nutrition, like eating unprocessed foods, because they're focused on eating fewer calories. So if you get it from a ultra processed shake with artificial sweetener and artificial fat. Sure. It's like almost everything is wrong about that, you know?
Yeah.
And you've failed at it a million times. So many people have failed with it. So let's start by broadening the discussion
Mhm.
and then bringing in these useful tools from other aspects of science that have been extraordinarily useful for other problems.
One of the things I appreciate about this book that I think readers are really going to latch onto is when you talk about food, you're not talking about it as this is right and this is wrong, obviously, except for the ultra processed, but it's the idea of what effect does it have? Does this increase ghrelin? Does this satisfy hunger? What is the impact of the food versus is it right or wrong? Am I good or bad if I want this?
Yeah.
Like you said, it's not a diet book. It's a how to understand what's happening. What's the interface between what our body does with food and what our mind does with the responses to food, and how we can then set up a structure that helps us differently. And one of the things I wanted to make sure you and I got to talk about today, you brought it up a while ago, is the hormones of insulin and cortisol. I'm curious because I think so many people in the TFM community, so many clients that I talk to, one of the biggest drivers of disconnect between all that they know about fasting and food and everything is stress. Why is it that when we're stressed, we want certain foods? Why do we feel incapable of not eating certain things when we're stressed? What about cortisol drives this for us?
Cortisol is a natural hormone. So you always have to have some stress in your body. That's how you grow. But the problem with cortisol is that it's supposed to go up and then it's going to go down. So if you think about this sort of old days, like you're a caveman, you get stressed, you see a lion, you're stressed. So then that floods your body with energy, you get stressed, you have to do something. It's the fight or flight response. So you either fight the lion or you run away. Either way, it resolves itself. So you're either dead or you're still alive and the lion is not there anymore, right? So the whole idea is that acute stress is probably just normal. That's part of living, right? It's part of an adaptive response. What's maladaptive is chronic stress. That's what we're not meant to handle. So chronic sleep deprivation or money problems or marital problems or something, right? And that's the problem. You get stress and it never goes away. So that's not what we're very well meant to handle because that cortisol over time is going to lead to weight gain. And that's going to tell your body to gain weight. And what happens a lot of times is people have a sort of chronic high stress from work or whatever. Your boss is an ass, so you're always stressed and you're always working. And then you get a little spike on top of that chronic stress. And the problem is, so cortisol, which is the stress hormone, there's a synthetic form of it called prednisone. It's used for all kinds of conditions like asthma and so on. So we know exactly what it does. You give somebody chronic steroids, they don't gain weight at first because that's the same thing. Your body is meant to handle acute spikes of cortisol, but it's supposed to go away. When you get the chronic stuff, so when you give these drugs for like a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, then that's when you start seeing all the problems. The blood glucose goes up, but you get a lot of weight gain. Everybody knows this, right? So it's the chronic stress, not the acute stress, that is the problem. And the other thing is that this cortisol is now telling your body that you need to gain weight. How is it going to do that? Well, it's going to activate your hunger. So that's why you get this stress eating, you get the munchies at late at night because you're working hard and you're stressed. You got so much work and nobody appreciates you at work anymore. And then you get this, and then at 2 a.m. you're doing work, but you're like ravenously hungry because your body's like, hey, you need to gain weight, you need to gain weight, you need to gain weight. That's what the hormone is telling your body, which then translates it and says, okay, well, how am I going to gain weight? Well, I'm going to activate hunger. So therefore, at 2 a.m., you're rooting around in your kitchen for something to eat, sort of thing, right? And then you get a bag of chips or whatever. And of course, there's also the hedonic component, which is that if you're looking around for something, you're going to want something to make you feel better because you're not feeling too good about yourself because of whatever's causing all the stress, whether it's chronic pain or whatever. So you're looking for something that's going to make you feel better at the same time. Hello, ultra processed foods. And then you got the condition part, which is that, hey, it's so easy. If you're going to do that at 2 a.m., you're unlikely going to defrost a piece of salmon, and even if you had it, and then fry it up and make a big mess and smell up the kitchen and sort of thing, right? You're going to wind up grabbing a bag of cheese puffs or crackers or whatever, right? And that's the condition part. So easy, so convenient, so inexpensive. that's what you're going to take. And that's why some people try and get around it by saying, oh, don't buy it. It's like, yes, that works until you really miss it. And then eventually you give in and say, okay, you know what? I'm going to buy it just in case because it's the hedonic part that you're missing. So again, understanding that that's what drives a lot of the chronic stress, chronic pain, stress eating, and all that sort of thing. It's not always an easy solution because you can't necessarily get rid of that stress. But what you can do once you identify, and so this is the knowledge and the mindfulness, is that once you identify, hey, this is the underlying root here, then you have to say, okay, what else can I do to relieve the stress? And that's where you say, okay, I recognize this. This is stress eating. This is the hedonic component, the condition component. I'll try not to buy it. But what am I going to do? Right. And that's where you say, okay, now I'm going to do yoga. I'm going to do walks. I'm going to do hiking. I'm going to do exercise. I'm going to get out into nature. I'm going to do grounding, put my feet in the grass every so often when it's nice. Which is actually kind of funny because I was reading about grounding, which is, I don't know, there's this whole theoretical thing about electrons and stuff and that we're disconnected from the earth. And I'm not really sure if that's true or not. So I thought, okay, well, let me try it, right? So I just took off my socks and I put my feet in the grass. It's a nice day and stuff. And it's like, whoa, this is really, really relaxing. It's like, I don't know if it's due to the electrons or whatever. I felt a lot better. So now in the summertime when it's nice, I try to take off my shoes. And so I'm not disconnected. I'm sure the science is still very controversial, but it's like, hey, I feel pretty good when I just walk barefoot in the grass, right? So if you feel better, if you say, okay, this is my response to stress, then you can start to develop a plan to deal with the stress. The stress itself may or may not go away. The marital problems, the money problems, the work problems. That may or may not go away. All you can do is change your response to that stress by making it something else. There's lots of ways. Meditation is a way. Exercise is actually quite an effective way because remember, acute stress is meant to be dealt with fighting or fleeing, right? Fight or flight. It's meant to be dealt with by physical movement. So therefore, things like exercise actually are quite an effective stress reliever. So in that sense, it can be a very good weight loss aid, not because of the calories, but because of the other things. Or you do things like saunas and talking to a friend or something like that, right? Other ways to deal with the stress. And that's where you're going to be able to then make the good choices. While you can't change the stress itself, you can change your body's reaction to the stress. And that's the only thing you can do. But again, that's understanding the process, right? That comes from knowledge, that comes from mindfulness, not from saying, hey, I'm gaining weight, eat fewer calories. But what about the stress? That was the whole problem in the first place. The stress, which was creating the hunger, which was causing you to eat. You can't just say eat less. That's the symptom, not the cause. You haven't identified the cause. The problem is the stress, which is causing the symptom of overeating, which is causing the weight gain. You're treating the symptom. You're not treating the cause of this, right? So it's like treating a fever, but not treating the infection. It's not going to be successful. And that's just basic medicine. It's just trying to understand things. But again, I'm always so discouraged by this whole reductionist stuff that's out there that's all calories, it's all calories, it's called calories. No, it's so much more than calories. If you think it's about calories, you're sort of already toast.
And as you've said, focusing on only that one small piece misses all of this other part. And I think to wrap up, you did a really great job in the book of highlighting it's really about oftentimes we're turning to problematic food, this ultra processed food, because our system is dysregulated, chronic stress, or there's tension in us due to some stressor. We need relief from that tension. And we learned a long time ago that a donut helps or potato chips help. So we go to that one solution because it has worked in the past.
Yeah.
But what you just talked about is there are so many other things we can do to help regulate our system and ease that tension, ease that cortisol. So we've got to go into that mindset of, I have used this solution in the past. It's not serving me well in the ways I need it to serve me. What other solutions can I go to?
Yeah. And I think that's important, right? Because it will help. The donut will help in that moment.
That's right.
Yes, it will. And maybe when you're 5 years old, that's all it took. But it doesn't work when you're 50 years old because that little momentary blip isn't enough to make you forget about all your health problems or chronic pain or whatever, right? So while it might have been fine in the past, you can't hold on to that. And that's where you really have to sort of strive for these other solutions. And that's where we're trying to get to. That's where I don't think as a society, we've not really gone into that because of this whole calorie culture sort of thing,
Mhm.
especially from the nutritional sort of authorities, all these heart associations, diabetes associations. Because honestly, it's like people think it's their fault, but it's not. I mean, you can read any authoritative textbook. I mean, it's changing a little bit now, but I've read these authoritative, a handbook of obesity. There's another textbook called Diabetes Mellitus and stuff, right? There's a scientific statement from the American Heart Association from 2021. So very, very recent. And it's exactly the same thing. It's like, it's all about energy balance. I'm like, oh, goodness. If there's sort of one overriding message from that, it's like, if you're having difficulties with the weight loss, it's not really your fault because you really haven't been given the good
That's
information.
right.
You've been given this really shallow, reductionist, simplistic notions of eat fewer calories. If you don't lose weight, it's your fault. Highly destructive attitude leads to the fat shaming and all this other stuff. And really, it's like that's not helpful. Like the shaming is not helpful, the information is not helpful, none of it was helpful. So therefore, how can you blame it? It's like giving students a test and you never taught the material, right? And they fail, right? So it's like, well, how did you expect them to pass? Because you didn't even teach the material and you tested on it.
Easier just to blame them.
Yeah, then you blame them. You say, you guys are so stupid. It's the same thing. Like, we don't tell people the hormonal piece. We don't tell them about the hunger piece. We don't tell them about, it's not just calories. There's so much more to it, right? We don't tell them any of this. And then when they gain weight, we blame them. We like, oh, yeah, eat fewer calories. Oh, you slug. You don't have no willpower. That's all it is, right? And that's from all the gym bros and these other calorie bullies who are like, they like to use their thinness or lack of fat as evidence of moral superiority, right? That's the problem. They love it, right? Because they're on that side. So they love it because they're like, oh, not only am I fit, I'm more willpower and more better than you. It's like, I get tired of it sometimes. It really is. It really sort of bothers me, this sort of attitude that some of these people have. Energy balance, energy balance. And it's always the thin people, right? It's never the people who are suffering from it. So they don't actually understand the hunger because they didn't have the hunger. They don't understand why you can't simply eat less. Why can't you just eat less? Because they're hungry. You don't understand, right? Because they've never had that problem. Maybe they don't have the chronic pain syndromes. Maybe they don't have the hedonic hunger problem. They don't have whatever it is. Like they're imbued in a culture where they're fit and not eating all the time and eating good food. So therefore they don't have the conditioned hunger. They don't have the hedonic hunger. Maybe they're genetically also thinner. But whatever it is, they've never understood it. So they've always just sort of said, it's just calories, right? It's like, oh, that doesn't help anybody. It really doesn't.
Well, fortunately, we've had the obesity code from you and now the sequel of the hunger code to really understand the big picture. And I know you and I will get to have another conversation. So I look forward to meeting again and talking more about this. So thanks, Jason, for joining me today and all of your insights.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone, and we will look forward to talking with you soon on another episode of the Fasting Method podcast.